Few literary stars have burned as bright as the late Oscar Wilde, whose unique, paradoxical, and intriguing blend of boldness and grace dazzled in the flesh as well as on the printed page. While Wilde remains a controversial figure, his calculated flamboyancy inspired many, yet irritated his detractors, few dispute the talent, influence, and singularity of the man and his work. In the video today, we're looking at some of the reasons why he was just quite so great. Number 10. Immorality. At Wilde's core, passions simmered. Although he tried to live conventionally by marrying Constance Lloyd, as time passed he found it more difficult to repress or even to take care to hide his sexual preferences. As he embraced his true self, he naturally turned away from the moral status quo of his time. After all, the value system of his age was clearly in direct opposition to his own desires. While he occasionally romanticized the rites of Catholicism, primarily for their beauty alone, the principles of the church were typically analyzed in great detail and then forcefully rejected. While critics of Wilde may view the author, poet, and playwright's immorality as a great negative, those who honor Wilde's literary legacy are more likely to view this immorality as honesty with regards to living one's life, one's own way. Number 9. Decadence. I have a duty to manage to amuse myself frightfully. Again, decadence, like immorality, may not be viewed as a virtue depending on a person's own moral perspective. In other words, this type of excess is not everyone's cup of tea. However, those who do value the hedonistic elements of life's experience may well appreciate the innate and carefully cultivated decadence of Wilde. It is very safe to say that Wilde pushed things to the edge. Sometimes his desire for pleasure led him to make terrible mistakes. For example, his liaisons with men were well documented, and these dalliances tarnished his reputation, while also setting the stage for later imprisonment within the dank confines of Reading jail. By acting out publicly, Wilde gave his enemies, who were legion, a great deal of ammunition. However, his decadent experiences surely provided him with some of the self-expression and inspiration that he needed in order to achieve the pinnacle of creativity. Wilde, unafraid of much of anything, although he did have some fear of poverty and ridicule, both of which awaited him in the distance, and certainly unafraid of the darker elements of human existence, was more than happy to lead a very decadent life, frolicking among the denizens of the night. Lazy and chatty, Wilde was renowned for embracing the life of the mind. However, he was also a sensual human being. Therefore, he frequently soothed or stimulated, depending on his mood, his senses with excesses of food, rivers of alcohol, dandyish clothing, and a stream of young and handsome lovers. Number 8. Heart. One young and handsome lover stole Wilde's heart. Nicknamed Bosie, this delicate blonde creature, Lord Alfred Douglas, displayed quirks which were certainly a match for the Irish-born Wilde's own idiosyncrasies. While Wilde was often perceived as blithe, above it all, and cold, his feelings for his beloved Bosie, who in the end betrayed him profoundly, ran very hot. Until the end of his life, Oscar wrestled with his tortured passion for Lord Alfred Douglas. In moments of clarity, such as those experienced during his soul-destroying and health-destroying stay in Reading jail, he saw his true love for who he really was, a shallow and childish man who was motivated almost entirely by self-interest. Yet even then, Wilde's heart would sometimes soften towards the often cruel and always beautiful man who was once his primary muse. It is entirely possible that Bosie had returned his ardor back in the old days. It may be argued that Wilde's enduring love for the man was a central element in his eventual loss of reputation, his poverty, and his early death. After all, it was Bosie's irate father who publicly accused Wilde of homosexuality, thereby provoking Wilde to sue him. Although this libel lawsuit was dropped, Wilde was later charged with several counts of gross indecency and was convicted on those charges and sent to prison. On the flip side, his adoration of the spoiled English aristocrat and poet who coined the famous phrase, "I am the love that dare not speak its name," undoubtedly added significant fire and eloquence to his work. Wilde idolized his lover until reality stared him in the face and he could no longer make himself believe that Bosie's love was in any way equal to his own. At this point, he experienced intense heartbreak. Number 7. Influence. While Wilde had Bosie as his muse, as well as other muses such as his own mother, who was quite eccentric, and the popular stage actress and great beauty of the day, Lily Langtry, he also served and continues to serve as the muse for many other artists. For example, back in his time, he was the subject of a pen and ink drawing which was created by the acclaimed artist Aubrey Beardsley. In addition, Beardsley illustrated scenes from Wilde's controversial play Salome, which Oscar wrote while living in Paris. In our time, Wilde continues to inspire. One key example of Wilde's modern influence is director Todd Haynes' cinematic effort, Velvet Goldmine. This film tells the story of a famous glam rock star who fakes his own death and whose androgynous, flamboyant ways are inspired by the spirit of Wilde, whose gemstone brooch the glam rock star wore. Musicians who count Wilde as one of their muses include former Smiths frontman Morrissey, who collects first editions of his work, as well as Billy Corgan of the Smashing Pumpkins. Of course, these examples only scratch the surface because Wilde's influence is so far-reaching. Number 6. The Picture of Dorian Gray. Oscar Wilde pens only one novel, The Picture of Dorian Gray. However, this relatively slim volume left an indelible impression upon its readers. Published in the summer of 1890, the novel outraged certain critics of the time due to its innovative approach to morality. In fact, the editors of the novel culled certain passages from the work without telling the author in an attempt to tone down the book's indecency before its publication. In time, Wilde himself stepped in and altered his work by writing extra chapters and adding a now infamous preface. In the story, the protagonist, Dorian Gray, is painted by an artist named Basil. Basil becomes obsessed with his handsome subject. Dorian then meets an aristocrat, Lord Henry, who influences his behavior and beliefs. Celebrating sensual pleasures and beauty above all else, Lord Henry becomes the catalyst for pronounced changes in Dorian's personality. Gray becomes fearful of losing his youth and his allure, and lightheartedly relates a wish to sell his soul in return for never-ending youth. In other words, he wants his portrait to grow old while he remains exactly as he is now. Magically, the request is granted. As Dorian falls further into a hedonistic lifestyle, the painting shows the march of time and the fearful effects of sin. Number 5. Plays. The multi-talented Wilde also excelled as a playwright. His efforts in this literary genre, such as Salome, The Importance of Being Earnest, An Ideal Husband, and A Woman of No Importance, are known for their stinging social critiques, which are delivered with Wilde's characteristic elegance and refinement. Among his work, Salome stands out from all the rest. With Salome, Wilde deviated from the norm by setting his play in biblical times. Those who appreciate satire, which attacks the hypocrisy and moral strictness of the Victorian age, will likely benefit from reading these works and/or attempting to see performances of the plays. Number 4. Poetry. Oscar Wilde wrote many beautiful poems. However, one of them is utterly devastating in terms of emotional honesty. Written in the memory of his sister Isola, who had died at the tender age of 9 due to an effusion of the brain, the poem will likely move anyone who has lost someone that they loved so deeply. The poem is called Requiescat, and here's an excerpt. Peace, peace, she cannot hear, lyre or sonnet. All my life's buried here, heap earth upon it. Number 3. Style. The role of aesthete came naturally to Wilde, who ardently believed in the value of style. While there was clearly much more to Wilde than surface appearances, he was nonetheless devoted to appearances and made no secret of the fact. From his long dark hair to his sweeping capes and velvet and silk suiting, it was abundantly clear that Oscar cared about his outfits. In addition, he believed that everyone should be able to wear whatever they wished. This mode of thinking was obviously rather unorthodox during Oscar's era. Wilde shared his views on fashion and aesthetics in his treatise, The Philosophy of Dress. Number 2. Wit. Maybe the wit of Oscar Wilde should be number 1 in this video. After all, it is a pure distillation of the man's genius. But we've actually put another thing at number 1. Since Wilde is so extensively quoted even today, I'm not going to detail any of his classic lines here. Chances are you've read them all before. Suffice it is to say that a gem such as "it is absurd to divide people into good and bad, people are either charming or tedious" will always resonate with many of us. Amusing, exuberant, rebellious, pitiless, Wilde's exceptional intelligence and unique mindset brought magic to every quip and chance remark that he uttered, and the world is better for it. Number 1. Bravery. Who is braver than Wilde? Who suffered more in order to be who he truly was? By facing his oppressors in court and out in the world, Wilde displayed the magnificent courage of a lion. To imagine Wilde's suffering in Reading jail is painful. To think that one of the greatest minds of the age was locked up and relentlessly persecuted, even though he hurt no one, is heartbreaking. The great visionary gave countless gifts to the world. Sadly, in the end, most of his friends were of the fair weather variety. In other words, they chose to shun him when he was penniless and in disgrace. However, in his bravery and honesty, he distinguished himself as an authentic human being. He moved beyond the superficial. In addition, with just his body of work, he immortalized himself. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below, and do not forget to subscribe. Brand new videos every day of the week. Also, check out something from the archives linked to on the screen now. And as always, thank you for watching.